Our next step now is going to be to calculate our test statistic. So from the formula that we just had previously, I'm going to take my values that I calculated when I was checking my requirements, and I'm going to start plugging them into that formula for the test statistic. So the test statistic tells me that z equals, and then I have to do p hat 1 minus p hat 2. So I would have 0.917 minus 0.879, and then minus the p1 minus p2. Well, that value turns out to be 0 from our null hypothesis there. And that's all going to be divided by the square root of the quantity, p bar times q bar. So before we can get that value, we have to do our computation to find p bar. And it tells me that p bar is equal to x1 plus x2 divided by n1 plus n2. So x1 and x2 are my number of successes from each of the sample. So for Big Burgers, there was 287 correct orders. And from Jim's Drive-In, there were 153 correct orders. And then my denominator is my sample size from each of those. So 313 was my sample size from group 1, and 174 was my sample size from group 2. Now, when I go ahead and add those together, I get 440 divided by 487, and then divide that out, and I get approximately 0.903. So P bar is about 0.903, and then Q bar is the complement of that value, so I have to take 1 minus 0.903, which is going to give me a value of 0.097. So now I can come back up to my test statistic, and I can finish the denominator of that formula. So it says I need to take P bar times Q bar. So I'm going to have 0.903 times 0.097, and that's going to be divided by N1. Well, N1 is the sample size for my first group, which was 313. And then I have to add that to P bar times Q bar again, so 0.903 times the 0.097. And then on the second fraction, it's divided by N2, which is the sample size for my second group. So that would be my 174. So now make sure you follow your order of operations when you're doing this entire computation. And when you get this all said and done, you end up getting a test statistic of 1.3578, and it keeps going. So this is going to be the value that we will use as our test statistic. Now, from this point on, you would follow just the regular steps of the basic hypothesis testing. So you would decide if you want to use the p-value method or the critical value method, and then you would proceed from there. I'm not going to go through that because it's the exact same as in the video for basic hypothesis testing. Now, we can also use statcrunch in order to come up with our test statistic. And in order to do that, we are going to go to the stat menu. We're going to go to proportion stats because we're working with proportions. We will pick to sample, and then for our particular one, we would choose with summary. Now, if you are doing an example that has your raw data values, then you would pick with data. All right, so I have StatCrunch opened here, and we need to go to our stat menu, proportion stats, to sample with summary, and that's gonna bring up this window. And then it tells me for sample 1, I need to enter my number of successes here, and then my number of observations. So remember, for sample 1, we designated that to be Big Burgers, and my number of successes from the problem was 287, and then my sample size was 313. Okay, sample 2 was from Jim's Drive-In, and my number of successes for that one was 153, and my number of observations was 174. Then I come down here, I want to perform a hypothesis test, and it'll default to say the P1 minus P2 is equal to 0, so I'm going to leave that alone. And then I just need to check the symbol for my alternative hypothesis, and we were doing a not equal, so I'm going to leave that alone. if you were doing a less than or a greater than symbol, all you have to do is click on the drop down arrow here and then select the appropriate symbol from that box. Okay, once you double check to make sure you have that all in there, you just have to press compute, and as you can see, it gives us our test statistic under ZStat, which was 1.347, very close to the value that we got when we were doing it. Now the reason that they're off slightly is because we used rounded values when we were doing this by hand, whereas the computer program doesn't have to round like we have to round. Okay, so that's how you can find your test statistic in statcrunch. And then notice it also over here, just like normal, it gives you your p-value also if you need that.